This is the Storypunks podcast, a show where we talk about all the punks. So steampunk, dieselpunk, cyberpunk, and all the other punks. I'm your host, Cindy Grigg. This is episode 13 with hairwork artist Courtney Lane. And hairwork is different than hairstyling. It was used to commemorate deceased loved ones or many other purposes, but basically it is artwork made from human hair. And it's totally fascinating. This is an art form that sometimes is associated most with the Victorian era, but it spans well before that. It's a big part of human culture across many different societies and time periods. And so makers, creators, writers across any number of genres, and especially these punk genres that can be very historical, you should find this absolutely fascinating. Human hair and how we make art out of it. So a really compelling interview, and Courtney is just endearing and fabulous, and I just love this interview. So I'm excited to share that with you and talk for quite a while. So I want to be conscious of your time. It will be a longer episode. My personal update this week will be very short. I've been sick this week, so that always throws us for a loop, right? I'm really lucky. I don't often get sick. And so maybe I'm a baby when I do, but this one was probably the sickest I've ever been. And so, yeah, everybody drink your orange juice, eat your raw garlic, whatever you do it and stay healthy because it's no fun. And yeah, that's my 2 cents. We've got to take care of ourselves. And so without further ado, let's get right into this interview with hairwork artist Courtney Lane. Courtney Lane is a Victorian hair artist, historian, and professional weirdo based out of Kansas City, who has dedicated her life to pursuing knowledge of hairwork techniques, as well as the peculiar history behind the art form, by creating modern pieces of Victorian hairwork and educating the public about the often misunderstood background. Courtney seeks to ensure that this sentimental tradition is never forgotten, and that's capitalized because she has a website called neverforgottencl for her initials.com. Welcome up to the show, Courtney.
Thank you.
Okay, so as we get started, this show is about the punks. So we usually talk about steampunk, dieselpunk, cyberpunk, all that. So my first question, especially since steampunk is associated with the Victorian era many times, and also hairwork is associated with the Victorian era, are you associated with steampunk?
So I would say lightly so. I've never personally considered myself a steampunk. However, I am very Victorian era centric. A lot of my wardrobe and personal aesthetic is very Victorian centric, and often in public I sport a top hat. And so it seems to be a common theme in my life as of the last maybe year or two, where little old ladies will come up to me and say, "Are you one of them steampunks?"
They will?
And, oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Whoa.
Which is amazing because 3 years ago, all the little old ladies would come up and say, "Are you one of them Goths?" And so I understand that if people see me and hear about my work, I very often do get associated with the steampunk subculture and genre. And I'm more than okay with that. It's not a label I've given myself per se, but I love steampunk culture. I love steampunk media, and I've consumed it myself. So it seems to be a natural flow.
I think so too. And probably some of the other punks we go over in the show, but that's just open to anybody's interpretation and where they want to take hair work.
Yeah, absolutely.
And on. But that's pretty cool about the generation gap closing for steampunk, at least for people knowing what it is. You know, I had an author on the show, and he was saying how when he goes to elementary school visits, he used to, people didn't know what steampunk is, and now the kids will start using the word to him.
Oh, so I believe cool. that. I absolutely believe that, because say 10 years ago, I would have people, if I was wearing something elaborate in public, they'd say "Oh, are you doing a play? Are you in a show? And then it turned into, oh, you must be one of them goths. And now I get, oh, you're one of them steampunks. And so,
you're one of them something.
One of them something. So everyone likes to try to categorize people. And even though in my own personal aesthetic and work, it's very fluid, I think that's probably the case for most people within subcultures. It does sort of have a natural crossover.
Yeah, there's this ebb and flow with that this tension, because we want to be open and we want to be creative, and then sometimes it informs what all of that to try to define things. So thank you for entertaining that first question. And just for anyone who doesn't know what hair work is, I alluded to it at the very beginning, but what is it and how did you come to be enchanted with it?
So hair work is using hair, normally human hair, to make artwork or to make jewelry. And very often, 9 out of 10 times, it is for sentimental purposes. So it is the idea that hair has a power. Hair is inherently sentimental. There is something magical about our hair. And if I were to cut a lock of my hair, that means something to the people that love me, because it's a part of me. And it's very often, as you said, associated with the Victorian era, because it was often used for mourning, to commemorate a deceased loved one. And people think of Queen Victoria and black gowns and veils and mourning. And so that's why hairwork sort of falls into the Victorian category, even though it has a wider scope than that. But it's not just for mourning. It's for a romantic gesture to keep something of your living loved one. It's to keep your children's hair if you're a parent. And it's just the thought that this hair is more than just hair. And I can display it as a beautiful piece of artwork on my wall or in a dome on my table, or I can wear it and keep it with me all day.
Oh, that's so cool. So for those who are completely new to it, it may sound odd, but just like Courtney brought up, it's something that we see in other forms. You know, you hear of lovers giving each other part of their hair or whatever. But then I think that sometimes when we put it into a very intentional art form, people, for some reason, that's different for people. And I think in a positive way, but you know, it's
Absolutely.
all up to taste and interpretation, I guess. And
so many people hear about, you know, the Victorian mourning hair, and they think, oh, that's morbid, that's macabre, or hair is gross. But it doesn't take too many jumps to figure out how hair fits into even modern society. I think most people in Western culture can say that their parents saved a lock of hair from their first haircut. And even if it's just in the baby book or in a box that no one opens, it exists. There's something very inherently human about having a desire to keep that hair.
Yeah. And other things, you know, my family, we saved our teeth.
Oh yeah. Lots of people do that too.
Yeah. And then when I was trying to, you know, kind of minimize some of the stuff in my life, that was actually really hard to get rid of my teeth. Isn't that wacky? I mean, it's just weird.
Oh, I mean, tooth jewelry is a thing too. They made jewelry out of hair. They made it out of teeth. If it is a part of the human body that is not going to decay anytime soon, it's a perfect reliquary to keep.
That's awesome. Okay, so can you give us a taste for some of the Victorian history that sometimes people may be misguided about when it comes to hair work?
Sure. Well, I did already mention sort of the idea that everyone who's familiar with hair work thinks that it's always mourning. It's always sad. That I would say is the most common misconception, because hair was happy. It was positive. It was to keep of your living loved ones. And then if they were gone, it was a piece you could still keep from them. And that sort of goes back even a lot further than the Victorian era. I would say that the hair work that people would often think about, the wall pieces, the jewelry, the idea of using it as that type of art form goes back to the Middle Ages. It goes back to the idea that when the Catholic Church was the law. And in Catholicism, there was a very heavy power invested in saintly relics. If you could be near the relic of a saint, you were with that saint. And that very elaborate public religious mourning sort of easily translated to more private personal mourning. So if this bone from this saint is the saint, then this hair of my family is my family. And so really between the 1500s up to the early 1900s, hair was used very widespread for that purpose, to keep of someone that you love.
It's so cool. And for creators within these historical spaces, this just opens up a lot. So I hope it's giving the audience tons of ideas. I know it has for me as someone who's writing, and all kinds of art forms could be informed by this type of storytelling, because I consider it storytelling what you're doing.
And that's so funny that you say that, because I've never been one for small talk. And when I meet a new person, a very common small talk question is, "Oh, what do you do?" I always start with, "Well, let me tell you a story," because I can't just say like, "Oh, I'm a Victorian hair artist," because most people don't know what that means.
Sure.
If I just say that, they think I'm a hairstylist, which, trust me, I cannot make hair look pretty when it's on the head.
I was going to ask you if you had background in hairstyling.
No, not one bit. And honestly, I have no patience to even try to work with the hair on my own head. I am no such thing as a hairstylist.
Well, you still have fun styles and stuff. In all the YouTube videos I've seen, it's still, I mean, yeah, you do a good job.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So now the hairwork art form, it's also been called death positive. And if you could tell us a little bit about this term for anyone who's not familiar with it, this will help us understand how it fits in with funeral services or other similar things.
Absolutely. So the death positive movement is I would say, largely growing movement as of the last few years. And I think when a lot of people hear death positive, they think like, death isn't a good thing. And they have this knee-jerk reaction of, why would you want to be death positive? It doesn't mean that we love death. It doesn't mean that we want to die. It means that we acknowledge and accept that we are going to die. And people within this movement believe that if you can think about it, meditate on it, discuss it openly, and just having that that connection to your own mortality, that you can in turn actually live your best life. And that even goes back to the Middle Ages as well, the concept of memento mori, the remembering that you're going to die. And it just sort of helps you put things into perspective in your life. What do you want out of your life? What do you want out of your death? Do you want to be buried or cremated? Do you want someone to cut your hair and keep it? And it really fits in very well with hairwork, because many would say that the Victorian era was a more death positive time. The infant mortality rate was higher. People were more aware that that a sickness could easily kill them in just a matter of a couple of days. And modern technology, modern science, modern medicine has taken away a lot of that concern. More people today are now considering, well, I'm going to live into old age. Back then, people didn't necessarily have the luxury of assuming that they would live into old age. And so it was always ever present. And anyone who is familiar with Victorian mourning, they know that it was very outward. You would wear black, you would wear a veil, if you were deep in mourning, you would not go out into public for the sake of having fun. You would maybe go to church and then right back home to mourn. And it was a very public affair. Now, some people in the death positive movement almost romanticize that, because in modern society, we have sort of a denial of death, to take the phrase from Ernest Becker. We don't want to think about death. It's not pleasant. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to think about dying. That's scary. And of course, who would not be afraid of their own mortality? But if we take it back to mourning, we ourselves almost don't allow ourselves to mourn in the most healthy ways anymore. If you have a traditional 9-to-5 job, if you lost a relative, you might be required to be back full performing 2 days later. Or maybe you only have the day of the funeral off from work and then right back, and people don't want to see you cry. They don't want to talk about it. People don't know how to ask, like, "Oh, are you doing okay?" They're very uncomfortable about mourning and interacting with people that are mourning as well. So a lot of people might look at the Victorian era and say, like, "Oh, they were able to mourn and it was beautiful," which is just not always the case. There was a big social pressure. There was a lot of sexism involved. The women had to mourn a lot longer than the men.
Yes.
And so I always like to say that there are things we should and should not learn from Victorian mourning. We absolutely should feel comfortable to mourn how we need. We should feel like it's not a weird or macabre thing to save a lock of hair. We should celebrate it as this is a beautiful thing, and this is a comfort to me, and it's not weird. It's not gross. I'm not morbid. So there are definitely positive takeaways and things that I'm glad are no longer the case.
Oh, yeah. Where they'd take pictures with the corpse of someone who passed away.
Yep, that was definitely in the Victorian era as well, the post-mortem photography. And some even say that photography is what killed hair work. And I vehemently disagree. I've seen a lot of pieces of hair work that included a post-mortem photograph. So if anything, it was a great supplement to hair work. And it was still certainly a visual reminder of the person. But the belief was that the power is in the hair, because this is a part of my loved one, which a photograph is great as a visual, but it doesn't hold the same sentiment.
Yeah. Now I'm going off script a little bit to bring this up, but have you ever heard of tear catchers? And does that come up with some of the stuff you do? Where they took they would have that little vial and they'd catch their mourning tears. And then when they evaporated, it was supposedly like a release, like you can stop mourning so much.
So yes, yes and no. Many years ago, I thoroughly believed in tear catchers. I loved the idea of them. I was reading about all of these different cultures that did different things with them. More recently, I'm starting to learn, and other historians are starting to learn, that it really isn't what you thought it was. And a lot of the bottles, the lachrymatories or the tear bottles that you see that are being sold on eBay or Etsy were actually just perfume bottles.
Oh.
So there's some misconception there as well. And I haven't dug too deeply into it recently because it hasn't been my focus, but I've done enough research on it to know that there's a lot of bad information out there about tear catchers.
This is so cool. So I just have to say, I am personally so impressed with Courtney. I mean, I already was, but so I've been studying tear catchers a little bit, and she used the right term. I can't even say it. It was whatever that is, but it's the right one.
Lachrymatory.
Lachrymatory. Thank you. Okay, so just talking a little bit more about your work. So on your site, neverforgottencl.com, this is a place where anyone can go if they want to learn more about your services, especially the FAQ page. And on that, you talk about how you do antique hair work, you do restoration work, but you also do custom work for someone who's lost a loved one, etc. So tell us a little more about the services you offer.
Absolutely. So doing the custom orders is how I sort of started all of this many years ago, and it's evolved ever since, but it's still the heart of what I do, because I think that the hair work is a beautiful aesthetic. I love it as an art, but it is so much more beautiful to consider that it's meaningful. And so if someone has a loved one who is deceased, but they have a lock of their hair and they want to trust me to take that lock of hair and turn it into something beautiful for them, either jewelry or wall art, I think that that is just so special, and I feel so grateful to be given that opportunity. It's not always mourning work I'm doing. I've had some really wonderful, I've even had some steampunk families who will send me the hair of everyone in their family and say, make me a piece of jewelry, just whole family hair, and everyone's still living. But I think that's wonderful. I think it's great that that people entrust me with something so sentimental and that I can provide that service for them. So I love doing my custom work. I love taking the hair of my clients, the hair of their loved ones, and giving them that special token. But I also do restore antique pieces. There are lots of pieces still around from the 17 and 1800s, and a lot of them throughout time have become quite damaged. Some of them, it's just common wear because it's so old, and some of it is because there was a span of time where people started accepting germ theory at the end of the Victorian era, and they were like, ooh, human bodies are gross, germs are gross, the hair is part of the body, ew. And so that actually led to some instances of people just trashing the hair work or taking it out of the frame so they could reuse the frame. So you might even find a wreath that doesn't have a frame anymore, but it's still kind of intact. So oftentimes there will be people who maybe have a piece that's a little rough around the edges, and they will send me a photo and say, can you fix this? And more often than not, I can, depending on the state of the piece. So I do sort of those restorations for the rougher pieces as well. So yeah.
So cool. I mean, it's so unusual and unique. I just absolutely love it. Very cool. Okay, now that FAQ page, it ends with this last question. So Courtney, list of questions, and Courtney says at the bottom, this is her frequently asked question. If I give you the hair of my enemies, can you make me something truly evil? So describe this misconception and why people apparently think this is associated with hair work.
Oh my goodness. So that exact question in exactly the same words was asked to me the very first time I ever decided to show my work at a convention. So I'd already been doing custom work up until this time, and the goal of going to this convention was mostly to get out there and maybe get some custom work, but I had some pre-made things that I made with just some Victorian braids that I'd found in boxes somewhere. And a very squirrely man comes up to me, and he's a little fidgety, and he's sort of drumming his fingers, and he's looking over his shoulders, and he goes, so let me ask you, if I give you the hair of my enemies, can you make me something truly evil? And I said, nope, no, I cannot.
This is my lunch break.
Yeah, I don't know who did what to that man for him to consider them his enemy. I don't know how he was planning on going about getting their hair, but if you come to me and say, this is the hair of my enemy, make me something evil, I'm not going to do that.
No.
I am no such thing as a witch. I do not know how to make voodoo dolls out of hair. I don't know where that came from. And I thought that was going to be just a one-off weird thing. But turns out that's not the case. There are a lot of people that have asked me similar things. And I did some reflection on it. And I suppose it goes back to sort of the same concept of hair being a part of a person and having a power. Because if this hair is sentimental for my loved one, why can't it be nefarious for my enemies? I don't know. It all goes back to the idea that people very often believe that there is more to hair. There's something magical about it.
Yeah, and I know there are a lot of people who genuinely believe in some of these other traditions. I think the funny thing for me was just calling it out as truly evil.
Oh,
the revenge factor. Yeah.
He was very open about what his intentions were, and I did not care to have any part of it.
Yeah. Have that energy following you. Yes. Okay. Well, favorite creations. Let's talk about some of the best things that you've ever created, or maybe there's something that's the most rewarding to work on versus the most rewarding to have finished. What are your favorites?
Well, as far as my custom work, I really love the mourning pieces, because even though it's not any more special than the hair of someone living, it seems to me to be very powerful because I am creating the everlasting memorial for this person. This is something I have been entrusted to do. It's almost like a private communion that I have with this person. I have your hair. This is a part of you, and I've been given the honor of preserving it. So I find something very, very special about that, and I love doing that. As far as certain types of work and types of techniques I really enjoy, I do sort of all of it. I make the jewelry, I make flat pictures out of hair, I do three-dimensional wreaths with three-dimensional flowers. It's really the wreaths that I sort of find most rewarding when it's finished, because very often it's larger, more time consuming than some of the other pieces. And it's one that you really see all the little pieces start to come together. So I'll make a flower here, and then at the end I can weave all of the flowers together and see the finished project. So it's sort of, in my eyes, something where I can more clearly see the steps. And it makes the ending that much more impactful when I say, I made this. And I do get some commissions for pieces like that, certainly, but a lot of them I make are just out of Victorian hair. And I love doing that because it was so common to save the hair in the Victorian era and even earlier that since hair doesn't decompose that quickly, if someone hasn't thrown it away, if it hasn't been destroyed, it's still just hanging out in a box in someone's attic at an estate sale, and I have to just go find that ponytail. And it almost seems to me that I can take that hair that's just sort of dusty and forgotten in a box and turn it into the work of art that I like to believe it was always meant to be. And it's also sort of a mystery. Who was this person? How did they live? How did they die? Who loved them enough to save this hair? And it's sort of, I like to call it mortal empathy. I like to think, well, I mean, I'm going to die someday. I would like to be loved enough that someone wants to keep this memento of me. So who was this person? And they were obviously loved enough to be remembered in this way. And even though I don't know who they are, even though they're nameless, I still just love that opportunity to sort of get to know them.
Totally.
in a way.
Storytelling again, right?
Storytelling, absolutely.
Courtney Lane, ponytail hunter. That's what I'm picturing.
Absolutely.
Heading out to go find ponytails. Well, okay, so I'm super curious now. Are there certain hair colors that are like most expensive or hardest to find? And so they're, among all the hair workers, they're just coveted, anything like that?
Well, I would say the hair that I come across least often is red hair.
Okay.
And that makes sense because there are just fewer red-haired people in general. And to a certain extent, even blonde hair, I don't find as often. I can't tell you how much brunette hair I have at this point. I have just bags and bags and mounds of brunette hair from all over the place. So that's definitely the most common that I see.
Well, and because of the mortality difference as far as age, is it hard to find like silver hair? Because they died before it turned silver?
I don't usually find the silver hair. And I think hair that did get to the point of turning white or turning gray was normally used right away.
Okay.
I think there are a lot of instances where the hair was saved without an immediate intention to do something with it. One of my favorite examples is a box that I found that contained 3 different locks that were all glued to a little piece of paper with handwritten notes of a woman saying, "This was my hair cut off when I was 18. This was my hair cut off when I was 30. And so it was fun to see because it was 3 different locks from the same woman at different points in her life. So you got to see the color changed a little bit.
Wow.
So it could even be a matter of someone just wanted to cut their hair when they were young and decided to save it, but it never got used for anything, even though it's still in a box.
Oh my gosh, hair selfies. That's what that was. Oh my gosh. Oh, that's so cool. Well, I also wanted to ask about the length of hair, but it sounds like you're talking about locks of hair. So it's not only like long strands of hair, like a spool of yarn. It's not always long hair, right?
Not exclusively. And a lot of that is going to depend on what type of piece you want or what type of piece you're making. So even with smaller lengths of hair, with smaller locks, you can do the technique called palette work, where you're making the flat pictures out of the hair. And you can make those really as tiny as you're able to work with. So you can put them in a little tiny locket. So even if it's only a tiny amount of hair, there is still an option for it. Now, obviously, don't expect to have a huge wreath with just a lock of hair. But the truth of the matter is, with the 3-dimensional techniques, I can use hair that's 4 to 5 inches. So it doesn't necessarily need to be that long. I can do more with it if it is longer. I can do some different techniques that I can't do with the shorter hair. But really the only technique where you are going to need long hair is when you are braiding the hair into a long chain to make a full necklace out of the hair, or a full bracelet, or a watch fob. And those are the ones where you're going to probably want at least a foot of hair, because the hair is the length of the chain. So that's really the only technique where you need a lot of hair.
That totally makes sense. Now, all these different techniques, Courtney's actually putting together a video series, or she already has a video series, but we'll talk about that in just a little bit. So if you're wondering about more of the techniques and all these specifics, the tools, she goes over that in her awesome videos. So that's coming up. Now, I have to ask, do people want pet hair preserved ever?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I do pet hair memorials. Actually, as of the last year, it's been almost as often as human memorials.
Oh, wow.
People really, really love their pets. And with most pet hair, we're going to be looking at flat pictures, that palette work, because most pet hair just is not that long. Now, if you have a horse that you would like to memorialize, I am going to jump for joy because that is very long hair that I can do a lot with.
Yeah.
And the horse hair, you can do pretty much anything you can do with human hair. So
the shampoo I use is for horse hair.
Is it now?
Yes.
That's fascinating.
There you go.
I love that.
Yeah. I mean, I would picture that. Is there a lot of treatment you have to do to the hair to make it glossy or whatever?
Nope, not really at all. Unless the hair was just washed before it was cut, all I'm really doing is cleansing the hair just with water and baking soda most of the time. There's really not a lot of treatment that needs to be done to the hair.
And they didn't really do hair dye, did they? They may have. I've never considered it for the time period for Victorian.
No, not quite.
So you're not having to deal with that. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, so cool. Well, my next question is about just the process, what you've learned. And I guess I termed it surprising skill observations, which is kind of a nerdy phrase. But what I mean is, have you come across something surprising where it just opened up all the techniques? Or you know how you come to these things as you stick with a skill like this? What have you found for anyone who's going on that journey as the hair worker?
Well, it's difficult to say because in my experience, I was, for the most part, self-taught. It was a huge journey for me to learn these techniques. Studying the history, looking into the actual literature, trying to find tutorials on how to do this, I was really only able to find a little bit on a couple of the techniques. I could find the palette work and the braided hair jewelry techniques, but I couldn't really find anything written about the wreaths. And the wreaths were my first love, so I definitely wanted to know how to do them. And it started by just studying the old pieces. And I mentioned earlier, sometimes you can find a wreath that is no longer in its frame or it's a little bit damaged. I would find those and I would just play with them. I'd take them apart a little bit. I did do some speaking with other collectors that have been collecting antique hair work for years who have made their own observations. So I was taking bits and pieces of information from a lot of different sources to try to put together the big puzzle in my head that was hair work. And I would say what was most surprising about it was the type of skill it takes to do hair work was not exactly what I expected it to be. And I don't quite know how to describe it even, because for me, I assumed I would learn how to do it just to sate my own curiosity, but I wouldn't be any good and I wouldn't do it because, as I said, I don't work with the hair on my own head. I have no patience for making hairstyles. And I've also never been much of a fiber artist. I haven't really done much sewing. When I was a young kid, I learned how to crochet and never loved it or stuck with it for long. I tried to learn how to knit at one point and it didn't work. So I assumed that hair work would be a combination of hairstyling and traditional fiber arts, none of which I excel at. However, when I actually sat down and tried to make hair work, I was kind of a natural and I was astonished. I didn't know why, but I could just do it. So I would say to anyone curious about the art form, just give it a try. Just dive into it and try it because you might surprise yourself. I've had some students that I've taught how to do this that have been hairstylists that haven't been able to do hair work, even though they can make beautiful hair that's on the head. So it is an entirely different skill set. And it's difficult to relate to anything else because I haven't come across anything else that's just sort of clicked in this way for me.
That's so compelling that you found something and you reverse engineered it. That's really, really cool, Courtney.
Thank you.
It's awesome. Now,
it's been a lot of trial and error for sure.
Well, yeah. And then so does that mean you've had to innovate like which tools to use, or were there official tools and stuff? I saw a few things in your videos, so I guess that's why I'm asking.
Sure. And so that's been part of it as well, because even the literature I was able to find on the palette work, as an example, they had all of these tools. They had gold beater skin, which is the intestinal membrane of an ox.
Oh
and
my gosh.
I thought, do they even make that anymore? And turns out, yeah, they do. Oboe players sometimes use it for their reeds, but it's not like I can't go to my local craft store and pick it up.
Yeah.
I mean, thank goodness for Amazon. You can find most weird things somewhere.
I was just going to say, it's probably not even on Amazon, but it is.
It is. That is where I found it, because all I wanted to do, even though I don't use it regularly in my work anymore, I wanted to feel it and touch it and see how it worked and experiment with it some. And I mean, I have a lot of empathy for animals. I'm actually a vegetarian myself, so I don't want to regularly use this gold beater skin. So I mostly wanted it for reference. How can I find a substitute for this? One that's easier to find and one that's more friendly to the animals. So that was just one example, but there were other tools. The braided hair jewelry I mentioned, they had tables for this. They had hair working tables. We don't have hair working tables anymore. Making hair work isn't as common as it once was. So I had to do more research there. And I found kumihimo tables, which is Japanese table braiding, which serves a very similar function. So I ordered a kumihimo table and tried doing the hair work techniques on this table. And what do you know? It worked. So
cool.
there have been a lot of substitutions, and you really need to understand what tools were used in order to substitute modern tools in some instances.
Yeah. Well, I don't have any idea what a kumihimo, I'm not even saying it right, what that table is or what it would entail. But can you show us a few things, whether it's tools or some of the things you've made, or do you have anything on hand?
Oh, goodness, I might. Well, actually, I don't know how well you can see it. So my studio is right back there. And if you see in the corner, there's a chair there and just sort of a little wooden table right in front of it. That's my kumihimo table.
Oh, okay. So it's not like a drafting table.
Nope, it's just little. And it's a round surface that has a hole right in the middle of it. So the hair gets counted out into strands. I affix them to bobbins that hang over the side of the round table. And the hair sort of goes through the circle as I just braid and weave the hair around the circle of that table. So it's very similar in function to what their hair braiding tables would have been like. Now, on the other hand, probably the easiest tools-wise is the hair wreaths, because some of it is just done free form with hair and wire and some thread to just thread it all together at the end. So some of it is freehand. The only real tool that I use to shape some of the flowers is a knitting needle. And that hasn't changed at all. It's so easy to find knitting needles. So that was sort of the relief I learned after trying to find a substitute for gold beater skin and to find a substitute for the braiding table. And
oh, so cool. Well, this takes us to where we can learn more about hair work. And Courtney, as you can tell, is a natural instructor. She makes it so easy to understand what she's talking about, even though this is foreign to most of us. So as part of your mission to educate the public, you also teach people one-on-one or in classes. And even if you're not near where Courtney is, so you can contact her about appearances and such, but you can also go to her Patreon page. And I spied some fabulous learning opportunities there. So if you can just tell us a little bit about what's available.
Absolutely. So I did just, as of the last few months, set up that Patreon account. And that came from mostly just people asking me to. I do travel to teach classes. I teach workshops, and I'll teach people these techniques. And there is a lot of interest, but it's all over the place. And it might be one person in this town wants to learn, 3 people in this country want to learn. So I'm not always able to go everywhere because I'm one person. So a lot of people said, well, can you make online videos? And at first I was like, oh, I don't know. I like talking to people. I like having fun.
As soon as you see her first video, you're going to be like, oh my gosh. I mean, she's a natural pun maker, number one.
Oh, yes. If you like puns, go to my Patreon. You will not be disappointed. Hair puns galore.
Yes. And they're awesome.
So, yeah, on my Patreon, I always say, you can support me for as little as $1 hair. See, there's the puns. So for my $1 tier, you get to see all of my bloopers from the online videos I try to make. And some of them are longer than the actual videos that come out, those blooper reels. Let me tell you, I am not a natural in front of the camera, even though I may seem like it. For a $5 tier, I actually do sort of more behind the scenes. When I travel to study hair work, I will vlog about it. So I will show you the antique hair work. I'll tell you about what I've learned, where I'm going. So that's for more people who are just really interested in where can I find hair work and what's the history behind hair work. That's just extra content that you'll get there. But the main goal of the Patreon account was to get online videos out to people who wanted to learn these techniques, but were not able to take a workshop of mine because of geography. As I mentioned, it was a major process of many years for me to learn, and I want the art form to be more accessible to people that want to know how to do it. So, I do have a tier where if you pledge $30 to my Patreon account, you get video tutorials, and those are monthly. Right now, I have 2 videos out already. So if you pledge today, you can already see those 2 videos, where in the span of those 2 videos, you can already learn 4 techniques.
That's what I like about Patreon, is that it's retroactive. I don't know if it always is, but everything I've seen is. So
yes, it is. So if you pledge today, it doesn't just mean you're going to get everything I do. It means you get everything I've already done. So you can already, probably hours at this point, hours of extra content on my Patreon account. And I do intend on doing a new video every month, because there are many, many, many techniques. I talked about just the basic techniques of the 3-dimensional wire work, the table work with the braids, and the palette work with the flat pieces. But within each of those techniques, there are multiple techniques within them. So that is something that is available if you're interested in learning how to do it. More coming out every month. And I will also say, because it is coming out very, very soon, possibly within the next week, probably before this even gets posted, I have started something for maybe someone who's more casually interested in just getting an introduction, but maybe isn't planning on becoming a serious hair artist or isn't planning on making a big project of their own. I have put together a starter box, which is going to have all the tools you need and written instructions with illustrations to accompany it, to teach you the standard wreath making technique. So for that box, once it comes out, you can just buy this box, just a one-time purchase, have all the tools and the instructions you need to just get that introduction.
Oh, that is so cool, especially for those of us who like to experience what we're writing about or the other types of art that we're doing, because you can get that experience without having to invest a ton.
Absolutely. And you never know. It might surprise you like it surprised me. I just wanted to know the logistics behind how this was done, and I was a natural and fell in love with it. You might think that you're going to be a natural and you might not be able to figure it out at all. Who knows? I do think that at least with the right time investment, if you're serious about learning, I do think that everybody is able to do these techniques. And in the starter box, it's going to be the basic technique where even if you only know this one, you can make an entire hair wreath out of it if you want. It's a very common technique. Many wreaths from the era are entirely comprised of this one technique. So it's definitely a good option if you want that start.
Oh, so cool. Thank you for mentioning that. And you know, after hearing this, after talking with you, Courtney, I have some friends who are knitters. So even when we're like in some public places, they will knit and it's so cool. But what if I whipped out some hair work?
Oh, please do. I would love to hear about other people's reactions if you were to do that.
On the subway or wherever.
I've done it before, actually.
Yeah, really?
So
people might not know what it is. Like they may not realize.
So it was so fascinating because I actually decided to do it on a train. Last year, I decided to take a train for the very first time. And I was taking a train to New York. And I thought, well, I'm going to be on the train for many hours. I might as well bring some hair work along. So
sure.
I had several full horsetails that were all in like rainbow colored horsetails. And I put that in my suitcase along with some of my knitting needles and my wires. And while I was on the train, I did just start doing some hair work. I just pulled out these horsetails and let me tell you, I have not had those conversations I had on the train that day were so fascinating. So many people were so interested in what I was doing. They were asking so many questions. They were watching me. It was a lot of fun.
And you have a captive audience, so.
No, it was so fun. So I do recommend doing unusual things in public. I love doing it. I get the best stories out of it.
Well, awesome teacup, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
But Courtney, this has been so amazingly eye-opening and unusual, and I've just completely loved it. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm so glad to be on. This was a lot of fun.
Just want to go find some hair and make something amazing. Or if nothing else, I hope this was intriguing. I will just keep this short and sweet because I know we talked a bit longer for this episode. Please head over to iTunes and leave a review if that's how you're listening to this, or please like this video on YouTube. Consider subscribing. I love having you in this community, and please have a wonderful week.